we start the Thank you so much. So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Rachel Kozy, and I'm the founder of our Empowered Women's Group. Before I introduce our guest speakers tonight, I just wanted to provide everyone with some background information on our organization. I'm prior military, and in 2017, I transitioned from overseas, and I had to start my life over from scratch. So I wanted to find a way to connect strong, like-minded individuals in an environment where we could really learn from each other's experiences and connect on a deeper level. So we launched our group in January of 2018. It was a brunch event in Washington, D.C. Since then, we've moved to happy hour, expanded to the West Coast, and now we're virtual. Our guest speakers have included everyone from relationship coaches to money managers to female founders and CEOs. And tonight we have two exceptional women with us from the Command Presence Foundation. I want to give a warm welcome to Erin Helbling and Katie Naquin. Thank you so much for joining us. Katie, I think you're muted.
I'm on now. Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Rachel, for the introduction.
Of course. Now, I want to hear about both of your backgrounds, but let's start with Erin. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing with Command Presence?
Sure. So, hi, I'm Erin Helbling. Currently today, I switched places with Rachel. I lived in LA, and then I moved to DC, and I work predominantly in the space industry. I'm currently the director of operations at a small satellite company called Hawkeye 360. And I, like Rachel, was in the active military, and I was in the Army as an Army engineer officer. And I transitioned and, like Rachel, had to find myself in a new world. And how do I acclimate and find my value in that world? And in finding my way, I met Katie. And the two of us together just had a great friendship and had, like Rachel said, strong values and empowered each other. And so I guess I'll hand it over to Katie then to introduce herself, because she's a big reason why I'm here today in the way that I am.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. So hi, everyone. My name is Katie. I'm one of the co-founders and the chief strategy officer of the Command Presence Foundation. So it's really great to see all of you this evening. A little bit about me. I moved to DC several years ago from New York City, originally from Arizona, to work in consulting for the aerospace and defense industry, so similar industries to Erin, and transitioned to the government side about a year and a half ago. So I'm now working as a DoD civilian, or Department of Defense civilian. So I'm not a veteran, but I'm here, like Erin said, because we, met several years ago on a recreational soccer team in DC and really hit it off. So, we used to joke that we would go to happy hour together after work and after our soccer games, and would sit and talk for so long that we would call it our second work day. So I guess I'm here today because, those conversations, I guess, have evolved into us actually kind of trying to do something and tackle some of these issues together.
Fantastic. So Katie, let's stay with you. First question, how do you define command presence?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And it's something that's frankly really hard to define. And I think even harder to actualize for that reason. So it's almost more of kind of like a feeling or an energy in a way, and it's certainly intangible. So it's something that Erin and I have spent a lot of time talking about. But more or less, command of presence is basically the ability to stand up in front of a group with or without a uniform and lead, and to have confidence in yourself to lead, and to bring others confidence in you. So the kind of working definition that we have developed at the foundation is that command presence is really kind of rooted in four key pillars. So that includes, your mission, your value, your story, and your community. So in other words, when you're clear about what it is that you want to do and, what gets you out of bed in the morning, when you're clear about what you have to offer and what your strengths are and what your value is, what your story is, where you've come from and how you've gotten to where you are, and who your supporters and allies and community are, that's really what powers your command presence. So our programs are really designed around helping veteran women reinforce and strengthen those pillars in their own lives.
That's fantastic. I absolutely love that. So Erin, from a slightly different perspective, how do you define command presence, and how does it differ between the civilian and military worlds?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm really appreciative of how Katie encompassed the way we target finding our command presence. And that is through those pillars of mission, value, community, and your story. And in the military, a lot of that is given to you, right? Like your mission is literally given to you. When I was in the Army, I knew what my mission was every day. And I let that become a part of my identity. And it was exciting. And it was one of those things where I had camaraderie with all of my fellow soldiers because we all had the same mission. And then when it comes to values, it was the same thing. They're literally the Army values, and we all have that. And that's something that everyone is aware of, and we all have that context. And then when it comes to your story, it's, as I said, in the military, everyone knows what you're doing and everyone knows what your role is. Everyone knows your rank, everyone knows your title, and they know what it takes to be there. In the civilian world, we just don't have that. You have to portray what it is that you're doing, and it have to portray what your rank is, or your title, or what it is that your purpose is. And then lastly, having that community. In the military, there are literally bases, and they are like your family, and there are programs that are there for you in all of the challenging times that you have, from, alcohol, substance abuse, all the way to family readiness. That is packaged up in there for you. And when you go to the civilian world, it's just not the same. However, like what's really cool about the command presence is that, like, to me, command presence is finding those pillars for myself and creating it for myself and being comfortable in that. And when I have those 4 pillars I've made for myself, then I can walk into any room and feel confident that I have what I need to basically fulfill my purpose, my command purpose. So that's what it means to me. And it's hard to find that when you transition, because you feel a little lost and you don't have like your base and your MWR, if people know what that stands for. And I'm just very thankful that this command presence community has helped me get there.
I love that. Transitions can be difficult. I know that firsthand experience.
Yeah.
So a question I'd like to pose to both of you. So at a point of transition in your life, can you talk about what you struggled with and how you overcame any obstacles?
Yeah, I'll take that one first. So I think for me, we actually talk about this a lot, is the idea of having imposter syndrome. And a lot of people identify or define imposter syndrome in different ways. But for me, it's when I'm somewhere and I feel like I don't deserve to be there and I'm like bullying myself, right? And an example that I can remember easily is actually recently, about a year ago, I was invited to a war game. And I was invited as a subject matter expert. And I remember walking into the room, and I was by far like the youngest person by like over 10 years. And I was the only woman. And I remember, like, that's one thing, right? But I remember walking in, and there were the other subject matter experts, and they all knew each other, and they were all catching up, and like they had their community. And I just remember walking in there and thinking, like, why am I here? I don't belong. And my command presence just, it wasn't there. And I found that in the military, I really relied on my uniform to give me that confidence and that command presence. Like when I was working at the White House as a military social aide for the president, I'd walk around in my uniform and people knew what I had done. They'd see my airborne wings, they'd see my badge, like they knew that I represented that command. And so when I walked into this room, I had my uniform to back me up and be my safety blanket. And I remember walking in there and just completely losing my identity. And so that was a struggle. And I remember we had like a water break or something, and I approached one of the people that was also a subject matter expert, and I said, I got kind of vulnerable, and I just said, I feel like I don't belong here. Do you have any advice? And he said something really powerful, which was, you are here because of your unique perspective. Like, you are here because you're not like everyone else here. And you are here because you should be confident in your point of view. And when I made that ally with him and I established that relationship, and I realized that like I am my own lottery ticket, and some of the women in the group would know what that means, that's when I started to get it back. So I want to make it clear that like, yes, like women veterans are a big part of my community, but also like allies are extremely important too. So creating that community that's diverse and meaningful was probably one of the biggest things that helped me through it.
Yeah, and one thing I guess I'll just add to that is, one of the things that we noticed when we started this whole thing is that what women veterans experience moving from the military into the civilian world is really not all that different than some of the pressures that others experience just in general life transitions, right? But in many ways, those effects are compounded. Some of what Erin had talked about a little bit earlier. So, in my own life, I've never transitioned from the military to the civilian world, but I have transitioned, and I know that it's hard, like you said, Rachel. And I think what I've struggled most with during those times of transition is just like the feeling of like swirling around in chaos, right? Just like not knowing like what way is up or down or sideways, like not really feeling like I had my bearings about me, not really, and just like kind of like a general feeling of groundlessness, right? And that can be really disorienting. And I think that's part of what makes transition so hard. So for me, like fortunately or unfortunately, really what helped me move through those moments and overcome those moments was just kind of time to allow the right people to come into my life, like Erin, to kind of help me through some of those things. And I think that's largely what inspired kind of our pillars concept, because we want to provide veteran women with those bearings and to ground them kind of during that chaotic period, but also to give them access to a community and the right people to help them through some of those moments, and hopefully not just leave them kind of at the mercy of time.
Yeah, I feel like what you brought up, Katie, is something that I forget to remind people is that like all of this transition stuff, the reason why it's so difficult is because we don't always provide for ourselves that structure and framework and that foundation for understanding what our mission is and what our purpose is. And that doesn't need to be set in stone, but sometimes it just helps to acknowledge that like I need to be grounded in that. And that's like a big part of what we do at the foundation through like our workshops is we identify based on your past and based on the value that you've taken from your story, identifying like what your command purpose is. And that foundation is required for everything else. And I wish that I had this for me when I was transitioning, because it's amazing. Like you look across the board at these different women that are hard performers and they're kicking butt, but there is something missing for them. And a big part of that is this foundation and then building up on that through the community. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
And Erin, I just have to say imposter syndrome is real. Every time I start a new job, every time I start a new degree program, I look around the room and I'm like, why am I here? I don't belong here with all these exceptional people. So I think that's a really important point, that in that sense of what you talked about, the vulnerability and being real and getting that feedback, which made you feel like, yeah, I do belong here. I have earned my right to be here. I absolutely love that. So the next question, again, I would like to pose to both of you. Can you think of a specific example of a time when you struggled with command presence? And being the all-knowing person that you are now, if you could go back and talk to your past self, what advice or insight would you say?
Katie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I think, in a similar way to when, you transition into the civilian world, I think like some of the groundlessness and like the chaos that I mentioned, I think I experienced a lot of that actually moving the opposite way. Like I was at a very small company and then moved into this huge bureaucracy where it's really hard to kind of find yourself, right? And in that huge organization. So, we actually had a conversation about this over the weekend. One of our event series is called Let's Grab a Bite, and we just kind of pick a topic and talk about it. And to start that discussion, we were watching an interview with Reese Witherspoon, where I think Erin mentioned she was talking about being her own lottery ticket, right? And like betting on herself, which I think is just such a powerful concept. And one of my really big takeaways from that discussion is that, your personal brand is not this like surface level thing, right? It's not like how you look or what you wear. And that's kind of how I had always thought about it, but instead it's really like your mission at your absolute core. And I think the times that I look back on, especially kind of entering the DoD, or just entering a new job, like you said, Rachel, that I remember, struggling most with my command presence, or times, I guess, in Reese's words, when I wouldn't have bet on myself, were times when my mission, I think, was most unclear to me. And that's most often, like I said, during times of transition. So I think my advice to myself, looking back on those times, would be really to spend that time and to make that time identifying your mission, and possibly more importantly, to really like trust others and allow them to help you along that road, that you don't have to do that alone. I think, the work with Command Presence Foundation has shown me that I think more people struggle with command presence than don't struggle with command presence. So I tell myself, I guess, that I'm in good company.
I love that you said people don't know they're struggling with it, because I didn't think I was struggling with it until it was too late. And so the way that I like to think about it is, when I left the military, my first job was at SpaceX, and it was awesome. I was learning a lot. I was performing well. I was a part of a really cool team doing really amazing things. I got promoted in months. I was high performing, right? But I still didn't feel confident. And I was trying to figure out why that was. And that's when I had realized that I was struggling with my command presence, was when I was on paper doing great, but I was struggling to feel professionally fulfilled. And I think a lot of people deal with that, where they are where they are high performing, they're kicking butt, but they are not feeling professionally fulfilled. And it is a scary thing to realize that, and to think, okay, I really need to think through what I actually want, professionally and personally. What is it that my purpose is and my mission is? And I quickly began to start to acclimate to SpaceX's mission, which is amazing. It's really cool. I started to acclimate to the values of the organization. I started to make that organization me. And that's just not something that I didn't really think about it until later on, that I was basically doing what the Army did to me with a company. And I think that is when I realized I was starting to lose my own personal value and worth. And I started to try to acclimate as much as I could. And I remember one day I just looked in the mirror and didn't even recognize who I was, not in a bad way, but just more what do I actually want to be doing? And then that's when, so if I could go back and talk to myself, I think I would just tell myself exactly what Katie said, which is, don't try to acclimate, really figure out with your support community and be vulnerable and dig deeper, like Rachel said, into identifying what it is that you really want to do. And it doesn't have to be life shattering. It's something that's a process over time, and we all accept that. And people like Katie helped me through it. And I just think there's such a great intersection with what Empowered Women's Brunch is doing, and this type of work of digging deeper and just accepting that it's a process. I don't know, Katie, if you want to add anything more to that.
No, I mean, I loved that answer. And I think part of what resonated with me was I think so often we conflate what we do with who we are. And I think the problem with transitions is that it strips you of the things that you do, right? So when you transition, for example, from being a student to being in the workforce, or being from the military into the civilian world, or really any transition, it really strips you of that identity, such that how I spend my time now is not who I am. And I think you should think of your mission and your value as completely separate from whatever organization or organizations you're a part of, whether that's a professional organization, an extracurricular organization, right? You have to really identify those things for yourself, such that if those things were stripped away tomorrow, you would still know who you were, and you would still know your mission, and you would still know your value.
I love that. And I think the most important part is that you have the ability to shape it to be whatever you want it to be. You have the options there to follow the mission of the company, but who do you want to be as an individual? And I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
If I could go back in time, my advice to myself would be calm down, take a deep breath. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, no, I thought that's such a good point too. I think really it's just be gracious with yourself, right? Just be patient, and this stuff really does work itself out if you put in a good effort, and you don't have to figure it all out at once. That's such a good point.
Absolutely. Calm down. Okay. So the next question I'd like to pose. Oh wait, we have a question here. Stephen Jones. Can we unmute Stephen? Or we'll just ask it. How do you develop mentors and support networks?
Erin, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. This is actually tough, right? Because in the military, they're given to you. Like when I was a lieutenant, my battalion commander said, like, let's meet in my office and talk about your goals and talk about who you want to be. And when I had the lieutenants I was working with when I was working as a company commander, I remember trying to mentor them. And it was just like this inherent structure that we had when it came to mentorship. And once again, when you're in the civilian world, you have to create that structure again for yourself. And I honestly, I think this is something that's growing. And the way that I've personally done it is I actually have started with people I can relate to the most. So for example, when I was at SpaceX, one of my first mentors was a retired Air Force colonel, because he could relate to some of the things that I was going through. But he also had this other unique perspective of being at the company for much longer than I was. And then from there, I started to feel confident. And then he would introduce me to some people that might not be a veteran, but might actually have some even more unique experiences that could aggregate to being like kind of on my board of advisors, right? And I feel like my mentors are kind of like my board. They bring different types of perspectives to me and help advise me and shepherd me in my growth and development. Like Rachel said, they help me take a breath and realize that I have these amazing people that are there for me. I always start out small with someone I can relate to, and then always ask like who they could introduce me to help blossom and curate that board, if that makes sense. Is this Stephen Jones that I know? Hopefully he can type or speak.
Anything to add, Stephen?
My mic was off, but yes.
Yes, that's the Stephen
yeah,
I know.
This is me. How you doing?
Stephen's a fellow veteran, by the way.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Erin, I loved that you said like people that you can relate to first, right? And I think like one of the things that I realized early on was that a lot of my professional mentors, like people that I would admire professionally, I didn't necessarily always admire personally. Like I didn't aspire to be them necessarily as people, which is really hard because usually like you pick your friends based on who you like as people. And so that was a really like weird transition for me as well. But something that I think I've kind of started to shift to, like you said, right? Like the values have to come first. And I think having the personal connection to me has become much more important than having the professional connection necessarily. I think also, and Erin, this is something that you talk about a lot, right? Is it's so important to have mentors and support networks of people that not only are like you, but who are different from you. You know, you want to have people who look like you and who do similar jobs to you, but also those who don't, right? Really to have like those people, a nice balance of people who can identify with and understand what you personally are going through, but also that offer kind of that different perspective, which is so important.
I love that you said the values first approach, because that is very true. Like your mentors are people that you should just inherently trust. And if they have the same values you do, that is very similar to the military, where I always wondered, like when I would go to a new unit, everyone would trust me pretty much right away. And that is something you just don't get in the civilian world. Like you show up to a new job in the civilian world and everyone's thinking, like, I want to trust you, but like, can I trust you? And it's interesting that like you're kind of creating that, Katie. I don't know if you know it or not, but you're almost like creating your own unit for yourself. And that's pretty cool through like having those shared values. So I like that.
Yeah, I love that.
Okay, so next question to pose to both of you. What does your ideal picture of command presence look like?
Katie, do you want me to go or you want to go?
You go ahead.
So it's really cool that you asked that, because as Katie said, the command presence is a feeling, right? The way that like I have made it easy for people to understand for myself is command presence to me is the feeling that I had when I would like had my uniform on and I would walk in front of my troops, and like I knew that we were a team and we were like working together at as a unit, and I was helping curate that as their leader. Like if I can make that the same thing in the civilian world, that is command presence to me, which is like having that uniform again. Like making my own uniform is what command presence is for me. And in our workshops, we identify our command purpose. And so my command purpose is leading, building, and inspiring people to see beyond what's possible. And like that is my command presence. And if I feel confident with my community and I am continually like curating that with the people that I trust with the values and the support and my story, like that is what command presence is to me. And it's always in work, and I don't ever think it will be done. And that is something I think I need to recognize, and that everyone should recognize. I like going back to Rachel's comment of taking a deep breath, that command presence is about recognizing this is a process, but you have your troops to back you up, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think one of my favorite things about command presence is that it really does look different for everyone. And I think Erin kind of mentioned this earlier, but you know, my command presence is different than Erin's. Like if I went into a room and I tried to act like Erin, like I wouldn't have nearly as much of an impact as if I went into a room and tried to act like me, right? And so what I think the way we've tried to reflect that in some of our workshops and programs is, like Erin said, having women define what we call their command purpose, which is basically like your statement that is unique. It speaks to your mission and value and what command presence looks like for you. So Erin read hers. So mine is, my command purpose is to shepherd others through critical decisions and complex problems by staying curious and embracing the unconventional. So like I said, they're very different. And like Erin said, it's really hard to figure out, and there's a lot that goes into that. But that's something that we really prioritize and try to give all the women who participate in our workshop something to walk away with.
I love that. Now I think it'd be a perfect segue to ask the group if someone would like to define command presence for themselves. And it could be military, non-military. I just want to hear your thoughts. Do we have any volunteers? No brave volunteers? Okay, I'd like to pose another question then. I think that imposter syndrome is something that we all definitely deal with at one point in our lives. Would anybody like to share an experience that they had with imposter syndrome and how they overcame it?
All right, Steve. Since I talked once, I figure I'm used to it. I'm done now. So you guys are sorry for you. I guess imposter syndrome was a point where I was working on a strategic planning team at United States Special Operations Command in developing a program to train foreign pilots. Now, I'm not a special operator, nor was I an Army aviator, but I found myself in Fayetteville, North Carolina, speaking to 160th pilot, or the very elite pilots for the Army. And I'm in the wrong uniform. I had two contractors that both served in those units. And then we immediately sat down with the commanding general. They all turned towards their old friends. And I was the principal in the meeting. So at that moment, at that instant, all the instant credibility that you thought you had just went away with an immediate head turn. But when you create those relationships that Erin had talked about with, people that you can trust in that support network, they helped turn that room's attention back to me as the principal of the meeting, and I was able to get done. But there was definitely an imposter feeling, even though we were all in the military. I was in the wrong uniform, and then I wasn't a special operator, and those are very tight-knit communities, but I had something to say, you know what I'm saying? And it was important. And, 7 Habits of Winning Friends and colleagues, I put those principles, to work. But yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I feel like it's interesting. Like I feel like your situation is very common to my war game situation where I walk in and I have a different uniform than everyone, and everyone has this really tight knit community, and I feel like I'm trying to infiltrate. And it's interesting that you and I both had realized that it's not so much about that, but it's more about building connections and and helping them recognize that you're not trying to be like them, and you're not trying to threaten anything they're trying to do, but you're just trying to build a connection and highlight something else and provide more value to what they're trying to do. So I found that's been helpful too. When I feel imposter syndrome, I feel like I'm not like others. It's just recognizing that, hey, like I'm here and I'm here for a reason, and this is the value that I'm going to bring today. So it's kind of cool that my civilian world example is very similar to your military example.
I have another example from the civilian world. I want to say thank you, Stephen, for sharing that. I'm in an MBA program, and I just started 6 months ago, and I am struggling to a certain degree, not so much anymore, but since the beginning, I've been struggling with imposter syndrome because the students around me come from very different backgrounds as me. I have a background in the arts, and most of my classmates have very, careers with very quant heavy backgrounds. I'm surrounded by accountants and finance people, engineers, people who are very good at math and whose brains work, solve problems in that type of way that I'm not accustomed to. And so my immediate response was kind of to feel like, oh my gosh, everyone's smarter than me, and I don't know if I deserve to be here. There was an activity we did as part of like a team building exercise very early on in the program where we had to get together and solve a problem. And they had us like out in, this is, when people still gathered together outside in the grass, like we were out in a group of people in a grassy lawn, trying to work as a group. Is a very physical activity, but trying to solve a problem. And all the engineers in the group and all the math geniuses in the group were like approaching it from a very a very logical standpoint. And just kind of trying to, it turned out it was kind of trying to like hammer a square peg into a round hole. And I was able to stand back and think, maybe we're not approaching it this way. Maybe we should do it this way instead. And I was the one in our team who wound up solving the problem that we'd been given because my brain was just accustomed to thinking of it in a completely different direction. So that really helped with my imposter syndrome, because I realized like, even though everyone around me looks differently, acts differently, thinks differently, I have something to offer here that they will never have. And so it's a matter of acknowledging where your unique value is and looking for opportunities to have the confidence to speak up and explain that, hey, I have an idea.
Yeah, I love that. Someone actually, it's funny, like we keep bringing up unique and unique and unique. And somebody recently, in actually one of our past brunches, we had a brunch about personal branding. And we talked about like the fact that our values while staying true to our core selves. And many people thought, well, I don't feel unique. Like, I feel like I'm very similar to many other people. I feel like, especially as veterans in the DC area, a lot of us feel that we're very similar to many other DC area veterans. But I think that people don't realize how unique they are. And that, yes, you might look and seem like everyone else, but you still have a unique view based on your life experiences and based on your relationships and based on the community that you've had and you're curating. So that's something that I want to remind people, is that although you might think you're not unique, you are. And having that support system to help remind you of that is so important. And it's helped me so much because like as a woman veteran, I felt invisible because in the military, and a lot of women veterans can say this, you are one of the most visible service members as a woman. And then you go into the civilian world and people potentially look at you and it's hard. It's really hard to have that identity because you feel invisible. Someone in the chat said something really cool. I think it was Elise Salomon, maybe. And she said that people are always watching, and many times we're inspiring others without realizing it. And I think that's just like a really powerful statement, that your command presence, you might not even realize that you have it. And having that support community is really helpful in reminding yourself that you do have it. So thanks, Lise, for pointing that out.
You're welcome, Erin. Sorry, you said my name correctly, so I'm so excited. It's Elise Salamone. And I am also a 27-year Army and Air Force veteran. And that story comes from the fact that I've had a lot of my airmen and people that I deployed with that many years later came to me and said, you inspired me to go to nursing school. You inspired me to do this. You inspired, and I had no idea that I had that impact on them till many years later. So here's to say that, you know, the way you carry yourself and the way you bring yourself to the table, people are watching, you just don't realize it, and you may not hear about it till many years later.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Actually, I think I feel bad. I'm going to call out Jenny. She's one of our members, and she, like you, has a lot of experience in mentoring people. And I bet like Jenny has the same experience where she didn't even realize she was impacting people until like in retrospect was reflecting. So I think it's cool to remind ourselves that we are always impacting people even when we don't realize it.
Does anyone else have a story they'd like to share, an insight? Cheryl, you have a lot of interesting and well-meaning comments. Oh, there we go.
Yes, I definitely understand the prospect, you know, the perspective of being unique, because when I deployed to the war zone, Persian Gulf War One, Desert Shield and Desert Storm, I deployed with a team of 13 men. I was the only female on a team of 13 men, and I worked in military intelligence. So anyone that knows anything about it, I don't know if it's still this way, but it was a white male dominated field. And whenever there was an issue, then there was lots of harassment, sexual harassment, gender bias, racial discrimination, the 9 yards. And they tell you, oh, either that didn't really happen or you suck it up and drive on because you were just a soldier. And it's like, well, if you see a wrong that's being committed against any soldier, it does make it right just because I stand minority, you know? And so if you are unwilling to stand up for what you know is being done wrong, then you are part of the problem. You're not part of the solution, even if you are higher in the chain of command. So I was certainly not a wimp, but it makes you have to be hard, just not to necessarily prove yourself, but so that they will know that you're not, you know, we deserve the right to be there. Not that anyone wants to go to war, but if we all bleed the same blood and wear the same uniform, then we are as patriotic as anyone else. And we're only there to do our job, not there to ruffle your feathers. And so many of the guys, I refer to them as gentlemen, they were certainly not. They were mean and they were hostile. And so it was definitely an experience in having gone there when there was pretty much very few people that looked like me, not just in color, but in having to work with all these pigs, because I did work with lots of pigs. So I even had to share a tent with two of them when I first went over there, because there was no female facilities, no anything. But I can say that what didn't necessarily kill me made me stronger. And when you have gone through a situation like that, then there's not really too much anything else that anyone can do to you that hasn't already been done. So we have to own it wherever we go. It doesn't mean that we have to be a force of nature, but we're more like a quiet storm. We're forced to be reckoned with. You know, it's like, don't allow the size to fool you, and we can't get necessarily intimidated by anything that anyone else has to say, because we are just as valuable and bring as much to the table, if not more so, than someone that has not been through what we've gone through.
I'd like to say something. I find this framing very interesting, the military versus the corporate world. And I really agreed with both of the definitions that Cadienne and Erringer had, but I was resonating with Anna because I went to business school in the early 80s, and being a female, and I was also from the arts, I was like a unicorn. And I had to understand that I had many superpowers that my colleagues did not. And I had a lot to bring to the table. And so I had to build their trust, and they had to begin to trust me to really move forward, because that's where we had to go. I also believe that I had great mentors, and sitting on boards helped me a lot, because I was someone who used to mumble and speak very softly, and that just didn't work. So now I teach entrepreneurship in a college, and this is one of the strengths that I try to build in my students, because one must be able to know who you are, utilize your strengths, know that to work on a team, because that's the best way to go. So I find this a really interesting conversation. I'm really pleased to be part of it.
Yeah, I love both of those stories. And I think, you know, one thing that kind of just reminds me of, right, is I think the pressure to conform is so real, right? And I think when you're a woman in a male dominated space, especially, your ability to conform is just limited, right? Like I can't be a man. I can't do that, right? And I think at a certain point you kind of you get stuck, right? And at a certain point you have to say, like, you have to embrace your unique value, because you really don't have any other option. And I think, but it takes a lot of, I think, courage to do that, which I think both of you have pointed to.
Does anyone else have a story or an insight that they'd like to share?
I wanted to, this is Elise again. I wanted to talk a little bit about imposter syndrome. So I am coming not only from a long military career, but also almost 30 years in healthcare as a nurse and nurse practitioner. And I just started my own coaching business. And this particular thought was in my head this morning. I was feeling like I'm having to completely rebrand myself as a nurse and as a professional. And that whole imposter syndrome is like, what am I doing? You know, why didn't I just stay in healthcare? Because you're having a week that isn't great in business, and you're having that, like, that constant no after having a week of having really good, productive, client conversations. So it's just that rebranding and just really, truly believing in yourself, because if you don't believe in yourself, nobody else will.
I love that. We say at the Command Presence Foundation, if you don't tell your story, then someone else will. And that's really powerful that you brought that up. And imposter syndrome, one way to get over it is to understand your story and understand where you came from and that value of where you came from, because that is the foundation of being able to market that value to others. And we've noticed that whenever we have discussions about personal branding and marketing, we find that there's two camps, right, from what we understand. And I'm actually really curious what other people think as well. The first camp is those that truly understand their core, and they are trying to figure out the best way to market themselves to different parts of the world, right? Because every audience is different. And it's not about compromising your core, but it's about finding the best way to tell your story about your core. And then the other camp is still trying to figure out their core, and still trying to not figure out their core and what they stand for, but figure out their core and what their value is. And we find that that's a larger part of the population, and that's what we're trying to solve. So thanks, Elise, for bringing that up.
Thank you. And I wanted to say that I had a client say to me, he came from a very pharmaceutical sales background. And he said to me, he goes, well, why are you doing what you're doing? And after I told him my story about being in corporate for 6 years and being laid off and terminated and just not valued for what I brought to the table, so that made me passionate to help people get into entrepreneurship. He was like, That's a great story. I get it now. So, and he actually became one of my clients because I was able to tell him my story and be authentic about it.
That's awesome. I was trying to find the clap emoji on Zoom, but I'm not that technically competent. So
It's okay.
I'll have to add that to the Zoom intro next time.
Thanks, Lynn.
So I just noticed another question in the chat. MADMM, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. It says, at one point, do you realize you can't change a toxic work culture and it's time to move on? Which is a good question. Like, you've done everything you can to remain solid to your values and cores. At what point do you just walk away?
Yeah, I mean, that is a really hard question. I think toxic work cultures are really hard to work through. And I think, honestly, that's really only, this is going to be a really unsatisfying answer, but I think that's really only a question that you can answer for yourself. I think everybody will have a different opinion on that. But I think just you need to trust yourself, right? You're the one that knows the details of your working environment. And I think the point for me when I would move on would be if I felt that my workplace no longer aligned with my mission and values. And I think if you can't say that, then it might be something to consider.
Yeah, along those lines, I agree with Katie. That's something you have to figure out for yourself. And I think many of us have been there. I think question number one for me is, can I impact this toxic workplace? And what's the probability that I can impact this workplace in the time frame that I'm okay with? And what does that end result look like? If answer number one is yes, then that's one thing, right? And you can work through your community and your workplace to figure it out. If the answer is number two and it doesn't align with your mission and values, I completely agree with Katie. But only you can answer those questions for yourself. But I found that's a really helpful framework. And I think if I had to guess how many people on this call have experienced that, I'd guess that there's more often than not, people have been there. So hopefully that helps a little bit. And I appreciate Elise's sentiments as well.
I would also just add to that, Erin, I loved that addition. And I would also just add to that if one of the only things that, if the main thing that's keeping you there is the fear of what's next or the fear of leaving, that's also probably a sign that it's time to move on as well.
Yeah.
This is Kanlan. I just wanted to make a comment, and I just really appreciate what you're saying about when to leave a toxic work culture. Because for me, there's like this balance between the community that you've created and wanting to do good for the people around you, but then what is like finding that balance between what is meeting your needs and your values, and then it's like knowing that I have to take care of myself and being able to have the courage to just trust that the next step is going to be a new opportunity, and everybody's going to be fine, and you just got to keep going, and just trust the values.
Yeah, I appreciate that sentiment. Like, it reminds me of like the cheesy saying where you have the bird that's on the branch and it talks about how the bird is not it's not in fear because the branch might crumble underneath it, but it's confident because it has the wings to hop onto something else. And so that's what it reminds me of a little bit. And I really appreciate that sentiment. Thank you.
Yeah, I also totally understand that pressure. And I think, especially when your workplace relationships are, deeper than just professional, I think that becomes even harder and even more difficult. But I do think I agree that it is a balance. And I think it's a balance of what's best for those around you and what's best for you. And, that's not to say that, if you left your professional work environment that you couldn't support those people personally from afar.
So Erin, Katie, we only have about 5 minutes left. So I just want to see if you have any final or closing thoughts, or if you could tell people how they could learn more about the foundation.
Yeah, sure. So one final thought is the Command Presence Foundation would not be at all what it is today without our volunteers, and some of them are on the line. So to those ladies, thank you so much. Talk about a community and talk about people that give their time to others to help them better themselves. Thank you so much, ladies, for being on. I think I saw Ryan and Lauren on, and Sinclair. So thanks, ladies, for being here. To find out more about us, please send an email to info@commandpresence.org if you have any questions about anything. We are actually starting our Veteran Story series. So if you're interested in your story being told, please email us as well. Or if you're just interested in getting involved in any way, we invite everyone to get involved. You don't have to be a veteran, you don't have to be a woman. We really value the diverse breadth of experience. So thanks, Rachel, for having us. Katie, do you want to add anything?
No, I just want to say thank you for having us. This has been an awesome conversation. And I know that Zoom kind of creates an awkward conference call vibe. So I just really appreciate everyone speaking up and making this more of a discussion. This was really fun for us.
Thank you so much, Erin and Katie. And thank you for all the work that you're doing for our veterans. As a veteran myself, we all sincerely appreciate it and we need the help. I also want to thank everybody for joining us tonight and to let you know that we're doing a series of free virtual workshops over the next several months. Our next one will be on May 30th, Alyssa Poskapesca. She is the CEO and founder of KindRoot, and she's an Anderson MBA alumni. She's going to talk about how she created her business while maintaining her sanity. The next event after that will be June 18th, Christiana Surreal. She's a dear friend of mine. She's going to talk about mindfulness during COVID. To learn more about these and future events and to sign up for our newsletter, you can go to empoweredwomenbrunch.com. And last but not least, I also want to thank my team, Lynn and Anna. Very heartfelt thank you. None of this would be possible without you. So thank you so much for all the work that you do. So have a good night, everybody. I hope to see you soon. Take care.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Everyone.